Welcome to the BreachLock Platform. This demo will walk you through the Vulnerabilities feature that provides a comprehensive and cumulative view of the vulnerabilities identified through the testing process. Along the left side is a series of features. Once you click on Vulnerabilities, you'll see a series of the vulnerabilities that were identified in the APT scans or continuous scanning. Once you enter the dashboard, the user has the ability to filter vulnerabilities by risk, from low, medium, high to critical. And also, based on the remediation state, there is a separate tab and a view for unpatched, patched, and false positive vulnerabilities. Now, by clicking on the vulnerability, the user can see the vulnerability details, which includes the number of assets impacted, in this case 4, the CVSS score at 3.1, and the CVSS vector, for which BreachLock supports both CVSS 3 and 4. Next, you will see the vulnerability description. This includes a description of the vulnerability itself, where it may have originated, and the potential impact if no action is taken. So BreachLock is not just providing a line item, rather it is part of a rolled-up view for better consumption of how many assets are affected with those specific vulnerabilities. Adjacent to the description is the recommendation. This is an expert recommendation for remediation of the vulnerability. Below are assets impacted. Each asset is labeled by whether it is identified for the first time, labeled as new discovered, or it can be labeled as rediscovered, or a vulnerability that has been seen before and is rediscovered on this specific asset. So for example, if it is discovered for the first time, it is labeled new discovered, and our experts will let the client know it is a newly discovered vulnerability and should pop up on their radar as new. A newly discovered vulnerability can be discovered multiple times, in this case twice, because every time it is another asset. So the two assets impacted by the same vulnerability are different, basically a new vulnerability seen for the first time. Now, if we click on an asset, you will find the vulnerability history on the impacted asset. This includes whether the vulnerability again is new or rediscovered, an update on the findings, URLs or a URL that may be vulnerable, and a description of the vulnerability. But most importantly, the user will find a proof of concept, which is concrete evidence of the vulnerability demonstrating that it is not a false positive. Now let's click out of this and go back to the main vulnerability page. Off to the far right of each vulnerability, you will see an automated rescan box. By clicking on this, the user will trigger the scan on all impacted assets, and validation checks are executed for that vulnerability only. Again, this is a rescan. If a vulnerability is discovered for the first time, it is labeled as newly discovered. However, if a vulnerability is discovered in further scans or automated rescans, it is labeled as rediscovered. If the vulnerability is not discovered in further scans, then the vulnerability will be moved to patched vulnerabilities. Now, in some cases, the user may want to categorize a vulnerability as false positive. After selecting an impacted asset, the user has the option to mark it as false positive. Marked assets will start appearing in the false positive section for that particular vulnerability. This concludes the demo on the vulnerabilities feature on the BreachLock platform. Thank you.